Hello. Today I will be featuring the Tier 8 Soviet premium, the Kutuzov, the Mikhail Kutuzov. Now this is a premium that I have often recommended as one of the strongest premiums in the game. It is highly potent against multiple situations because it can basically deal with anything. Now surprisingly, this latest patch has actually made this ship even stronger, which is, well, quite hilarious considering it was already very strong, but with the addition of certain perks like internal fuse HE, aka HEAP as it's also known, this ship has become even stronger. Anyway, for this perk, well, first of all, we get domination gameplay, which is of course my favorite. I really despise this map on Bastion. In fact, I don't think anyone really likes the Bastion mode for good reason. Hopefully Wargaming will soon listen to the community when they say that they are not really that big of fans of Bastion, since it's a pretty universally despised game mode. Regardless, moving on to the ship itself, I of course also run Adrenaline Rush, not Rage, but I like calling it Adrenaline Rage because I feel it describes the skill better. Because, well, for 2 points it's such a fantastic advantage, especially to ships that can sustain themselves at low HP. And the Kutuzov is of course a pretty prime example of a ship that can sustain itself at low HP. Just like the Belfast that has access to smoke, the Kutuzov can also smoke itself up at low HP and be able to deliver constant DPS, and it's exactly that kind of ship that Adrenaline Rush really favors. Another thing that I've also done is I've specced out of Expert Marksman. In the past, picking Expert Marksman was pretty much a go-to because there were no real good tier 2 perks, but this latest patch has given a lot of competition in the tier 2 perks, and now I have Jack of all trades as my second tier 2 perk to reduce of course the cooldown of the repair and anti-air, but most importantly of the smoke itself. The tier 1 perk is of course Priority Target. That is a perk that I have often talked about that is fantastic for cruisers, especially for the Kutuzov because you only really have 3 smokes. So with the help of this perk you can usually delay when you want to smoke up and when you don't, because you can see how many people are targeting you, when they're targeting you. It also makes it easier to evade. For example here, usually I would have turned in and evaded because I couldn't be certain if the Fuso or someone was shooting at me, but thanks to Priority Target I already know that none of these guys are actually even aiming at me. They're not even targeting me, so I don't bother evading and I just keep spamming out more damage. And that is of course certainly a buff for this ship. Well, it's a buff, it's a great perk for any cruiser, but the Kutuzov especially, since you can delay the use of that smoke. You only have 3 and you really want to delay it. This Gneiser now is playing extremely aggressive, so I slow down. I'm ready to smoke at any point, but until I see him start focusing me, there's no point. And that's of course the greatness of the Priority Target perk. Another thing you might notice is, well, I'm of course starting a lot of fires here, but I also do a significant amount of HE damage. And that's of course IFHE kicking in. One of the weaknesses of the Kutuzov was often when you faced ships that were angled. I might have used AP at the start, but honestly it's a battleship with full HP, so getting fires usually yields more raw damage eventually. Since I've forced his repair now, which means I can put permanent fires on him afterwards. Anyway, as I was saying, one of the weaknesses of this ship was of course always something is targeting me, a second one is targeting me. It could be someone on the other side of the island, or it could be the DD in A. And based on the small caliber shells I'm eating, yeah, it's the DD in A that's focusing me. I kinda ignore him though, because it's a Farragut, so he's not that big of a threat. I want to finish off the Gneiser now first, but he's starting to do some decent damage now, so I turn it around and start focusing him. The Gneiser now should be dead because I've done so much damage. As I was saying, one of the weaknesses of the Kutuzov was always when you faced cruisers that, for example, angled towards you, or battleships that angled towards you, you relied very heavily on RNG to deal damage to them. But now with IFHE, you deal very consistent heavy damage, which is of course a buff. Another thing the ship has become even greater at is of course killing DDs, especially when you face DDs that have better armor, for example Russian DDs, where they might shatter some of your HE shells. well, that no longer happens at all because of course IFHE allows you to penetrate them, so you do more consistent damage to everything, not just battleship or cruisers but even DDs. So overall, just a great advantage. Once again, this time I actually smoke up preemptively because I really want to finish off this New Orleans if possible, because the New Orleans is a considerable threat to me because he has radar, but unlike the Chapayev, he actually has to get fairly close. Notice that I'm moving slowly forward in my smoke intentionally, and that's because of course I want to generate an additional puff. For those that aren't aware how the smoke mechanics work, if you stop and if you pop a smoke and you stop perfectly right from the start, then you don't generate any additional puffs during the time your smoke consumable is active, which means you actually suffer a shorter duration smoke because of that. But if you move very slightly, then you force the game to generate additional smoke puffs, and all smoke puffs have a set amount of time, which of course is set on the consumable, how long they last. So if you force it to generate additional puffs as you move, you will get the most out of your smoke, whereas stopping first and then smoking means that you get the shortest duration smoke. And on something like the Kutuzov that relies very heavily on the smoke, trying to maximize it is very much worth it. Of course, unlike the Royal Navy cruisers, you are not a victim to the the Belfast and, well, Royal Navy cruisers in general. You're not a victim to the horrible Royal Navy smokes that tend to be very glitchy and buggy and such, so you can quite comfortably move a bit in your smoke and try to generate these additional puffs without any larger risks. I don't advise it in Royal Navy cruisers though, because their smokes are simply too unreliable to be able to count on that at all. Now, of course, focusing on the Fuso, he already takes great HE damage to begin with, and he's getting fires on him. That's, of course, not only do I run IFHE, but I also run Demolition Expert. And that's, of course, to offset the loss of fire chance from IFHE. We lose 3% fire chance by getting IFHE, but slapping fire chance flags and Demolition Expert on, we gain 3%. So ultimately, we are not really losing anything by taking IFHE. Of course, that's a bit of a silly way to look at it, because if we didn't take IFHE, we would be gaining 3%, but ultimately the trade-off to get this fantastic perk is very small. As I mentioned in the Belfast commentary, of course, IFHE is fantastic on any cruiser that can fire HE and can shoot 150 to 155mm guns. However, it's also quite good on ships that shoot 180mm caliber HE and 130. And that's of course very important because I like using this captain on the Molotov as well. It's not as optimal on the Molotov because there are certain perks that you don't really need, like for example Superintendent, but it works quite well, and the IFHE works quite well on the Molotov 180mm HE, and of course other perks like the Stealth, the Fire Chance, and well, all the other perks work perfectly well. It's mostly just Superintendent that is a bit wasted on that ship. So I like using this captain on the Molotov as well, so it's good to be able to share on multiple premiums. And of course this captain would work fantastically on the Chapayev as well, that actually gets the benefit of having Superintendent for that additional radar. So here you can, by the way, see the hipper. In the past, a hipper angling like this and pushing in could be a big problem because you couldn't really do that consistent HE damage, or well, the HE damage was fairly lacking when he angled. But of course with IFHE you do constant damage. You see 6 penetration, not a single bounced HE shell. And this of course applies to multiple different ships. Once again, every single shell that hits this guy is a penetration, there are no bounces at all. Carrier attempting to drop me, it seems. They really want to get rid of me, so I pop defensive AA. And that's of course why we run not only do we run the 20% increased range from our module, but of course that's why I don't run Hydra, but I run defensive AA. And he burns down fairly quickly, so I start focusing the North Carolina. North Carolina once again taking very heavy HE damage, and the fire chance is also quite good. Well, very heavy is subjective, but compared to the Kutuzov damage of the past, well, 4k volley, there we go, now we're talking, that is very heavy HE damage. And of course, as you can see, I've lost half my HP, so you might notice that my reload has suddenly dropped from, I think the default is 8 seconds. I now have about a 7-second reload on this ship. So a big DPS buff as well. So considering you're already doing this great HE damage, you have a great fire chance, and now when you're low HP, Adrenaline Rush is kicking in as well, you start to realize just how strong the Kutuzov is in this current patch. There's constant non-stop fire rate, and of course with Jack of all trades, shorter duration on the smoke as well. His repair has run out, so I'm already starting new fires on him. In the past, I usually tended to switch targets if someone had used damage con, because it was a waste of starting fires on someone who had damage con active. But with this IFHE, I do so much damage with the HE that I just keep shooting the same target. Because, well, even if I'm not starting fires, I'm still doing great damage, so might as well consider shooting the same target. Kutuzov appears to be turning in towards me, so I'm just going to see if I can finish the North Carolina. You might notice that the planes were coming towards me. I already selected them as a target, and of course, as I've always said, if you see carrier planes coming towards you, you turn into the planes, because that is the hardest for the carrier to deal with, and he doesn't want to spend too much time in my anti-air, because Kutuzov anti-air is very strong. While I dodge these torps by turning into them, I also finish off the North Carolina with some HE. Kutuzov has to abandon his push because of the Turpits pushing him. Well, and there's an Amagi as well. He's pretty much surrounded from every side. I also managed to get my Kraken there, which is of course also enjoyable. Yeah, he's just fleeing. There's not much you can do at this point. This is going to be a fairly short game, but ultimately I get to show many of the things that I actually wanted to show in this commentary. Of course, the reason why you run the AA module on the Kutuzov is because you want to increase the panic range, and in general just increase the AA range. There's no point running the reduced dispersion module, because you basically spam shells so quickly that you don't really need the increased accuracy at all. Well, I mean, it's always nice, but that is a module that should be used on battleships and not really cruisers, because cruisers have that AA range that is much more useful. I don't think I'll be able to shoot this Sideman before it dies. There's a Farragut right next to him and all these battleships. One of those rare cases where you actually wish you had a bit more range on the Kutuzov. What is actually my reload now? I can't check that. I'm down to 17k HP. My reload is, well, that was about 7 seconds I think. So a very nice increase in DPM regardless. Well yeah, my shells aren't gonna, those two didn't reach, and my next volley isn't gonna, I don't think it's going to reach him before he dies. Nope, it didn't. Well, the game ended here, but ultimately it was of course a very good game for me. 738k credits. I mean, it is a premium ship, but Kraken, Confederate, High Caliber, Witherer, Arsonist, get used to seeing at least those two on the Kutuzov. Well, you used to get them in the past, but still 20 fires, and considering I'm running IFHE, you can see that on ships like this, the reduced fire chance has very little impact. Looking at base XP, 2.2k, not that much, but that's mostly because, well, I didn't really get to defend any caps, and I didn't really capture any capture points. I mostly just killed, and in domination that doesn't really give you those huge 3k XP bonuses. Still a pretty damn good game, and I got to show off most of the things I wanted. When we move on to the stat screen, that's when we see the real power of the IFHE. That is of course almost 100,000 damage in pure HE damage. Usually you do get some AP damage mixed in. Of course, when ships give you a lot of broadside, then Kutuzov AP is still far more powerful than the HE. Much like in the Belfast commentary where I mentioned people tend to tunnel vision a bit too much. That certainly happens here, especially since you like getting those fires going, but this ship is extremely potent. Just a fantastic ship. I mean, I've always recommended the Kutuzov, but with this latest patch making the Kutuzov even better, all I can do is keep recommending it. If you happen to have the Kutuzov, congratulations, it has certainly gained a nice amount of strength in this patch. Anyway, let's move on to my recommended build, since, well, it's 0.6.0 and all builds have been revamped. Right, starting off we go to modules, nothing to talk about, it's premium. Run the premium smoke at least, and well, if you can afford it, the repair, you should. If you have a Kutuzov, you should be able to afford it. Main armaments mod 1, AA guns, as I said, to increase that AA range. Steering gears, because you happen to lose steering quite a bit on this. Propulsion mod, because your rudder shift is already 6.5 and being able to move quickly in smoke is more important. Stealth, because 11.1 stealth is amazing. Priority target, your first perk. Second perk, Adrenaline Rush, or Rage, if you like to call it as I do. Superintendent for that additional smoke. Concealment Expert to be able to sneak in and out of situations. Inertia Fuse to get that additional HE damage. Demolition Expert to offset the loss of HE or fire chance. And finally, Jack of all trades for faster consumables. I don't run Expert Marksman because ultimately the difference between running it and not running was something like 2 or 2.2 seconds to the turret traverse, which meant it was not really worth it. In the past I took it because there weren't really any good options, but these days there are so many great options. So that was my Kutuzov build for 0.60. I hope you guys enjoyed it.